the moment she said it. "We don't want to see your face at her graduation." I stared at the grid of their faces on my monitor. 1,000 miles away, on the 27-inch screen, my family looked like a panel of judges. Lila, the 28-year-old finance tech specialist, was usually the quiet observer, the one who held her breath. But today was different. My mother, Lorraine, didn't flinch. Her face, usually softened by a practiced, slightly tired smile, was set into a mask of authority. She had delivered the sentence without prelude or apology. "It's better this way, Lila," she added, her voice dropping into that familiar, saccharine tone that always signaled a demand dressed up as a sacrifice for the greater good. "Riley needs a peaceful day. You know how you get." My sister, Riley, sat beside her. 22, and the center of the universe. She didn't look guilty or even apologetic. She just smirked, her arms crossed, the picture of smug victory. It was the look of someone who had won a petty argument, but believed they had earned a kingdom. Riley's presence, and her quiet dismissal, hurt more than Lorraine's direct attack. It confirmed that this exclusion was a unified front. My father, Victor, was in his usual position, complicit neutrality. He sat just outside the camera frame, visible only as a shadow on the wall behind my mother. His face was turned toward the window, looking at anything but the screen, letting the silence do his dirty work. His silence was the family lubricant. It kept the machine running, allowing Lorraine and Riley to take without question. In that frozen grid, every quiet year of sacrifice, every unpaid loan, every obligation I had worn like a heavy coat, snapped. I had spent most of my adult life chasing independence out here in Seattle, building a career, and yet, I was still the golden goose, eternally orbiting their needs. The insult, the outright banishment, should have gutted me. It should have brought forth the usual panic. How do I fix this? How do I get them to let me back in? But today, the insult felt less like a wound and more like a key turning in a lock. The familiar pressure in my chest didn't build, it vanished. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for the reason, though I knew it was coming. A fresh wave of manufactured disappointment, or a lecture on my selfishness. I had carried their expectations so long that they genuinely believed I had no choice but to carry them forever. They thought cutting me out of a ceremonial day was the ultimate weapon, a guarantee of compliance. I stared at Lorraine's perfectly composed face. I then at Riley's entitled smirk, and then at the vacant space where my father should have been looking. My voice came out low and steady, not raised in anger, but cold with irreversible finality. "Then you'll never see my money again," I said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. A simple, undeniable consequence. The line didn't just leave my mouth, it left the confines of a life I was done living. Lorraine's expression was the only one that changed. Her brow furrowed, registering confusion, as if the words themselves were grammatically incorrect. It was the one thing they never expected me to take back, because they never believed it was mine to withhold in the first place. The Zoom call had ended, leaving behind a silence that was loud and ringing in my small apartment. My declaration, "Then you'll never see my money again," was a ghost in the room, forcing me to confront not just their cruelty, but the long, exhausting pattern that had allowed it to thrive. The shock of the banishment had finally shattered the fragile hope I had clung to. The idea that if I just kept paying, I would finally belong. The realization forced me into a painful, mental replay of the years I had lived in the shade. I had moved 1,000 miles away, chasing a career and independence, but I never truly left the family orbit. Lorraine was the sun, a blazing center demanding continuous fuel, and I was the obedient satellite. I was Lila, the financially secure older sister, and my purpose, it seemed, was solely to fund Riley's life. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself at the time. The call came the week I landed my first big finance tech job. Lorraine sounded proud. But beneath the pride was a practiced wariness. Riley's tuition bill had arrived. Could I help? Just this once. I said yes before the words were fully formed in her mouth. I remembered the warmth of that first. Thank you. A rare and intoxicating feeling. Once was a mirage. By the end of that first year, that single generous gesture had metastasized into every semester, every book, every expensive off-campus apartment Riley needed to thrive. Lorraine stopped framing it as a favor and started treating it as a standing payment. Riley never offered a word of thanks. When I hesitated, even for a moment, my mother would unleash the guilt, lacing her voice with a heavy disappointment that made me feel ungrateful for merely questioning my own exploitation. It was a suffocating pressure that always worked. I remembered one specific Christmas. I had saved meticulously to buy Riley an expensive, high-powered laptop needed for her design courses. I wrapped it carefully home and presented it. She tore the paper off, glanced at the screen for maybe 3 seconds, and let out a small, dismissive sigh. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "I thought it was the higher model. The one with the retina display." Lorraine had laughed, soft and complicit. "Maybe next year, sweetie." Lila did her best. I swallowed the familiar burn in my chest. I told myself it didn't matter. The price tag didn't matter. The effort didn't matter. But it did. The message was clear: my maximum effort was their baseline expectation, and it was never quite enough. My role was to provide, quietly, without praise, or else face the condemnation of being unsupportive. The moment that truly cracked the foundation came months later. I was home for a short visit, and Lorraine left her phone on the kitchen counter while getting coffee. A text message notification flashed from my Aunt Carol. Curiosity, and perhaps a deep, unhealthy need for confirmation, won out. I opened the message thread. Aunt Carol had asked Lorraine about the latest tuition payment. Lorraine's reply, followed by a smiley face icon, was a single, devastating line. "She pays because she's gullible. Let her." A follow-up text from my mother twisted the knife deeper. Some people were born to support the family. The air rushed out of my lungs. It wasn't just that they took my money, it was that they discussed me as an object. A predictable mechanism devoid of feelings or awareness. I was the fool who could be counted on. I never confronted her. The confrontation wasn't worth the guilt trip I knew would follow. Instead, I carried that knowledge like a dark bruise under my clothing, paying every bill. Even knowing the ugly truth, I thought maybe, just maybe, if I stayed useful, the illusion of belonging would eventually become real. But it never did. It only hardened their expectation. That deep, quiet ache of being the gullible cash cow was what throbbed inside me when Lorraine told me I was banned from the graduation call. And I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that this time I wouldn't swallow the pain. This time their casual cruelty had pushed me past the point of no return. The knowledge that I was merely the gullible provider had settled in my gut like cold stone, an ugly truth I had forced myself to live with. But the banishment on the Zoom call had been the catalyst. It pushed the deep-seated pain into action, setting the stage for a tangible, shocking betrayal that was worse than mere financial dependence. The days leading up to that final confrontation felt thick and heavy, like the air before a destructive summer storm. Lorraine had been sending clipped, urgent messages asking about the next tuition cycle. She did not ask if the payment had been scheduled. She asked if it had processed, already treating the money as her own. Riley, meanwhile, had been unusually quiet, which I now realized never meant peace, only plotting. I told myself everything was fine, that helping was just what I did, but a cold knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. The unease shattered into panic one Tuesday morning, when my bank alerted me to unusual activity. A calm, automated voice explained that a card under my name, one I hadn't used in years, and had frankly forgotten existed, had been used for several large, suspicious purchases. The voice listed them with unsettling precision. Designer shoes, a high-end bracelet, and a weekend shopping spree at an expensive downtown boutique. The total came to approximately $4,000. My stomach dropped violently. That card was supposed to be restricted for emergency, grocery runs from years ago. I hadn't touched it since I moved to Seattle. I knew, before I picked up the phone to call them, exactly who was behind the charges. When I finally reached Lorraine, I tried to keep my voice steady, professional. Lorraine, I just got an alert. Several unauthorized charges went through on an old account. Did Riley maybe use my card by mistake for something small? Lorraine laughed, a short, sharp burst of sound that held zero amusement. You're being dramatic, Lila. Riley needed a few things for graduation. Don't ruin the moment. She needs to look nice. It was just a few thousand, it's fine. Don't ruin the moment. I repeated, the phrase catching in my throat. As if the person who had been stolen from was the one creating the problem. As if the theft itself was an annoying inconvenience on her celebratory timeline. The casual dismissal of my financial boundary was horrifying. Still shaking later that night, I logged into my full banking dashboard. The situation was far worse than a single old card. 2 more credit cards, both established under my name for stability years ago, had been quietly maxed out or were close to their limits. These were accounts I checked regularly. But the family had found ways to route the statements or hide the charges within complex payment schedules I had set up for their various needs. I saw purchases I'd never approved: subscription services, furniture deliveries, and luxury items. Every single charge linked directly back to my family's home address or one of Riley's online accounts. My breath became shallow and uneven. This wasn't carelessness or a mistake. This was organized, routine expectation. It was entitlement that had metastasized into fraud. They hadn't asked me for money. They had simply taken it, believing they had the right to impersonate me. Then came the final, crushing blow. A screenshot, intended for Riley's close friend, was accidentally forwarded to me due to a group chat error. My name was at the top of the message chain. Underneath it, Riley's message. Don't worry about money. Ambar exists for that. She's basically our cash cow. I stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't the theft that chilled me. It was the word exists. It stripped me of my humanity, reducing me to a resource, a walking bank account. Something inside me went cold and terrifyingly still. When the Zoom call opened the next evening, their faces filling the screen with their familiar, demanding authority, I felt that old bruise throb. But beneath it, the cold resolve of my purpose had solidified. I knew then that the time for swallowing the pain was over. The shock of the banishment and the evidence of the theft combined into a strange, cold fuel. When the Zoom call ended and I delivered the line, "Then you'll never see my money again?" my Seattle apartment fell into a profound silence. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't rush to fix anything. I didn't replay their words seeking a point of compromise. I just sat, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket I'd forgotten I owned. The emotional decision had been made, now came the methodical execution. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow washed across my desk, illuminating the careful chaos of my life. I signed into the university's tuition portal. Riley's account was there, bright and expectant, showing one final semester pending, one last, massive payment scheduled under my name. It was the largest single remaining financial tie. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, not trembling from fear, but focused with quiet awareness. This was the moment where my emotional declaration was made tangible. I located the recurring payment plan tied to my debit card. With a single, decisive movement, I selected the option and clicked Cancel Plan. A quiet confirmation chimed back from the system. Years of assumed obligation, years of guilt, tripping, dissolved in that instant. It was a victory measured not in sound, but in silence. Next, I pulled up my bank dashboard. I had 3 credit cards tied to my identity that they had been using freely, including the 2 that were now maxed out with unauthorized purchases. I went through them one by one. I selected freeze account, a process usually reserved for lost or stolen wallets. Purchases linked to Riley's email, Lorraine's shipping address, or the family home. It all ended now. The system chimed 3 more confirmations, each one a solid barrier erected between my finances and their entitlement. The clarity in my chest was absolute. It did not feel like furious rage. It felt like a surgical precision, the quiet work of self-preservation. I removed every connected device they might have used to access banking information. Riley's phone, Lorraine's tablet, the home desktop where old passwords might have been saved. I updated all security questions and passwords, choosing ones they would never, in a million years, guess. Then, I turned my attention to the evidence. I systematically downloaded every bill, statement, and transaction log related to those accounts from the last 4 years. I organized the files into a clean folder named Truth. I wasn't doing this to weaponize the information, not yet. I was doing it to finally see the reality laid out plainly, mathematically. Every transaction, every assumption they had made about my role in their lives, was there in quiet, damning rows of numbers. It wasn't support, it was entitlement dressed up as expectation. As I compiled the files, I came across an audio note I had forgotten existed, recorded accidentally during a speakerphone call months ago. I clicked it open. Lorraine's voice, light and amused, floated from the speakers. Riley's laughter was in the background. "She'll pay," Lorraine said. "She always pays," Riley replied. Then came the joke. The line that rooted itself in me like a splinter, confirming the text message from months ago. "It's basically her purpose." I closed the file slowly. The recording wasn't needed to hurt them. It was needed to remind me. It was a final confirmation that the version of family I was clinging to simply did not exist. My phone buzzed on the table. "Riley, did the payment go through? I can't see it." "Lorraine, don't be childish. Fix this, Lila." "Victor, just breathe. Don't make things worse." Worse. As if the worst thing I had done was finally say no. I did not respond. Instead, I logged out of every shared account: music, streaming, grocery deliveries, and any subscription tied to my card. The list was far longer than I expected. I ended each one without hesitation. By the time I stood up, the sky outside was a soft navy blue. I felt lighter than I had in years, standing barefoot on the cold floor, breathing air that somehow tasted new. They thought cutting me out of a celebration would keep me small, but all it did was give me the space to finally step out. 3 days of profound quiet followed the cancellations. No more texts, no frantic calls, only a tense, unnatural stillness from a family who usually demanded my constant attention. The absence of their guilt and demands was initially unnerving, then became deeply peaceful. The silence was finally mine. That peace was violently broken when Lorraine finally demanded a new family meeting. The email arrived with the subject line stamped as urgent. It was the kind of urgency used by someone who had completely lost control, not someone facing a true crisis. The tuition payment hadn't processed. Riley's credit cards were freezing mid-purchase. The streaming services had cut out. Their life had hit a wall, and they needed their resource back online. I clicked the Zoom link out of curiosity, more than duty. A part of me wanted to witness the extent of their denial. A larger part wanted to test the strength of my own newfound resolve. When the screen loaded, they were already there, posed for combat. Lorraine sat front and center, perfectly framed in the living room. Her chin lifted, as if she were presiding over a business review. Riley, beside her, was not wearing her usual triumphant smirk. Her eyes were tight with raw irritation and petulance. Victor hovered near the doorway, hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking smaller and more defeated than I remembered. Lorraine snapped immediately, as if I were late and derelict in my duties. "We need to address your behavior, Lila." "My behavior?" "Of course." I remained silent, a new language they didn't yet understand. I let the accusation hang in the air. She continued, the clipped tone laced with escalating panic. "Riley's graduation is in less than 2 weeks. They won't let her walk unless the outstanding balance is paid. You know this. You've always handled it, so you need to fix it." Riley rolled her eyes dramatically, leaning into the camera. "I don't get why you're making this a huge deal. You're the one with the career. Just do what you always do." There was a brief, impossible moment where I genuinely wondered if they saw any of the context. The theft, the manipulation, the entitlement. Or if they saw it all and simply didn't care. That's when I realized the problem had never been their blindness. It had been my willingness to enable them. "I'm not paying," I said calmly. The simple sentence landed with the weight of an anchor. Lorraine blinked twice, the words clearly not computing within her transactional reality. Riley scoffed, but it sounded forced. Lorraine leaned forward, switching instantly to her most powerful weapon, guilt. "Don't be ridiculous. You're angry, fine. But don't sabotage your sister out of spite. This is her future." "I'm not sabotaging her," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm stepping out of a role I never agreed to play." Victor finally lifted his head, a weak effort at de-escalation. "Lila, let's not escalate. We can talk this through." "Talk." I let out a soft breath, tinged with a lifetime of exhaustion. "You never talk. You all tell." Riley threw her hands up. The performance back on. "This is so dramatic. You act like we've done something to you." That accusation, right after they banned me and committed fraud, was the final drop of acid. My control, however, remained rigid. I simply sat forward, ready for the true confrontation to begin. I was no longer the girl who swallowed the burn. I was the financial specialist who had compiled the facts. Riley's scoff, "You act like we've done something to you," was the final, infuriating act of denial. It confirmed that no amount of rational discussion would penetrate the years of conditioned entitlement. The problem was not that they didn't know. The problem was that they didn't care. That realization was the ultimate trigger. I reached for my mouse and clicked a button on my screen. "I tried talking," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, low and steady. "For years. Now, the numbers will talk." A window opened on my computer, visible only to me. It held the folder labeled, Truth. I shared my screen with the Zoom meeting. Their faces, momentarily confused, replaced the view of my living room. Then, the table of transactions became visible. "What is this?" Lorraine demanded, leaning closer to the camera, her perfect posture finally showing a hint of strain. "The truth," I replied. "The history of where my money went and how it was taken." I scrolled slowly, letting the numbers speak first. The bolded rows showed the unauthorized purchases, the luxury shoes, the pricey jewelry, the thousands of dollars spent in less than a week. I highlighted the recurring charges, the accounts linked to Riley's email address, and the specific shipping addresses that matched the family home. I zoomed in on the detail showing a grocery, only card used for high-end designer items. Riley's mouth tightened, her irritation shifting into fear. Lorraine's composure remained stiff, but a subtle flicker, recognition, or perhaps a cold assessment of the damage, passed through her eyes. Victor, moving out of the shadows, stepped closer to his wife's device. "Lila, you could have just talked to us about this. This is extreme." "I tried," I said, genuinely softly. "For years." I clicked to a different file, and the screen shifted to a simple audio player interface. The recording began to play. Lorraine's voice echoed, light and amused. "She'll pay," she said. Riley's cruel, tinny laugh followed. "She always pays." Then the line that rooted itself in me like a splinter. "It's basically her purpose." When the recording ended, the silence that followed was absolute, heavier than anything Lorraine could have created with guilt. Even Riley's performative confidence faltered. She looked away, crossing her arms tightly. Lorraine found her voice first, her tone now cold and defensive, rather than authoritarian. "I can't believe you recorded us. That is a disgusting breach of trust." "I didn't record you." I corrected her, still calm. "The device did, automatically. But I listened. And I learned." Riley tried to regain control, her cheeks flushing red. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "We were joking." "Proportion." I repeated, the words slow and deliberate. "You stole my identity. You used my credit. And when I canceled the tuition payment, someone impersonated me and attempted to reinstate the plan using my security details. The university emailed me about it." That last point landed hard. Riley visibly swallowed. "That was a misunderstanding." "It was fraud." I cut in. I paused, letting the word sink in. "And I am choosing not to press charges." For now, Lorraine's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "Charges against your own sister." "What is wrong with you, Lila? What kind of monster does this to her family?" "What's wrong?" I replied, staring directly into the camera. "Is that you raised her to believe she could do it without consequences, and you raised me to believe I had to pay for it." Victor finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Lila, we didn't know it got this far." "We didn't know." "Yes, you did." I countered, without raising my voice. "You just didn't want to stop it, because it benefited your peace." Lorraine slammed her hand on the desk, the noise vibrating the microphone. "Enough. You are not destroying this family because of a few misunderstandings. Riley deserves her moment. You owe it to us." I leaned forward. "I don't owe you anything." The sentence hit them like a physical force. It was the absolute rejection of foundation of our entire relationship. Riley, desperate, grabbed the narrative one last time. "So, you're just going to let me look stupid on graduation day?" "You're an adult," I said. "Your education is now your responsibility." Lorraine shook her head furiously. "You've changed." "This isn't you?" "No." I corrected her, finally allowing a small, fierce smile to surface. "This is me without your script." For a moment, the call fell into the kind of silence that reveals everything words have tried to hide. Then Lorraine attempted her final, most familiar tactic. "If you walk away now, don't expect this family to welcome you back." I felt the old, conditioned panic, the fear of losing them, rise up. But it was immediately replaced by a profound, solid sense of self. "I'm not walking away from family," I said, softly but clearly. "I'm walking away from people who never acted like mine." I finished my statement. "I'm walking away from people who never acted like mine." I hovered over the leave meeting button. Their faces were a desperate tableau: anger, confusion, and the sheer terror of losing control. I did not shrink. "I wish you well," I said softly, breathing in my new air. "But I'm finished being the one who pays for your peace." I clicked the button. The screen went dark, the call ended, and the silence in my apartment was profound. Absolute, and entirely mine. In the weeks that followed, the echo of that call settled into a quiet that was at first unnerving, then deeply, wonderfully peaceful. There were no more demanding emails, no guilt-laced texts, just silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes about the nature of our relationship when the money stopped. So did the communication. The first real update came from the university. A polite and formal notice I discovered in my email inbox, a few days before the scheduled graduation. It confirmed that due to a significant, unresolved financial balance and an attempted account impersonation that had violated their terms of service, Riley would not be permitted to participate in the commencement ceremony. They didn't mention my name, but the implication was clear. Someone had finally told her no. And the consequences were immediate and external. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel a malicious satisfaction. I simply sat in the sunlight that streamed across my hardwood floor in Seattle and felt the weight of 8 long years lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the restoration of balance. She had to face the reality of the responsibility she had always assumed belonged to me. A few days later, my building intercom buzzed. It was Victor. He had driven the 1,000 miles and showed up unannounced. Standing in the lobby like a man who wasn't sure he would be allowed in. I let him up. When I opened the door, he stood there, looking tired and smaller than I remembered him on the Zoom screen. He didn't attempt to hug me or offer any false warmth. He just looked around the quiet, minimalist space of my apartment, taking in the evidence of my independent life. "She's devastated," he said, his voice low, looking at the floor. It was the only emotion he ever seemed capable of expressing, reporting the emotional state of others. "Rally?" I asked, keeping my own voice neutral. "No, Lorraine." He corrected quickly. "Riley is furious. Your mother. She's pretending everything's fine, organizing parties that won't include the ceremony. But it's not. We didn't realize how much we leaned on you, Lila. Truly. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology. A quiet admission that I was not the selfish one, but the necessary pillar they had taken for granted. I didn't argue. I didn't soothe him or offer him a lifeline back to the comfort of denial. I simply stated the fact. "You lean because I never stepped aside." "Victor." He nodded slowly, processing the truth of that statement. "Are you coming back?" I shook my head, my eyes steady. "Not unless the terms change entirely. And those terms include respect, Victor. Not just money." He didn't try to change my mind. He didn't try to guilt me or threaten me with family exclusion. Maybe, for the first time, he understood that the threats no longer worked. He stood for another minute in quiet contemplation, then offered a quiet goodbye that felt less like an ending and more like a final shift in tectonic plates. He left, and the silence he left behind felt completely, unequivocally mine. I had established the boundary, and for the first time, one of them had respected it. Victor's quiet departure left a vacuum, but for the first time, it was a sustainable one. The weeks that followed settled into a routine built on self-respect, not obligation. I used to believe family meant endurance, that loving them required letting myself be continually drained and diminished. But the day they told me I wasn't welcome, I finally understood the truth. Love without respect, without reciprocity, isn't love at all. It is simply exploitation, dressed up in blood ties. The financial relief was immense, but the emotional freedom was immeasurable. I was no longer preemptively checking my bank balance, no longer bracing myself for the next guilt trip. The anxiety that had been a constant companion since my early 20s simply faded. I threw myself into my work, using my meticulous organization skills not to track their spending, but to advance my own career and savings goals. I walked away quietly, fully, and for good. There were no grand pronouncements, no emotional breakdowns, just a sustained withdrawal of access. They could be angry. They could be furious. They could tell their neighbors I was the cruel, selfish sister. But their opinions no longer controlled my actions. Their script was over. In the space where my family obligations had once been, I found something I had been missing my whole life myself. I started saying yes to opportunities at work, and no to demands on my time. I allowed myself to enjoy the sunshine on my Seattle apartment floor. free from the shadow of their expectations. My purpose was no longer defined by what I could give them, but by what I could build for myself. The banishment they had intended to use as a weapon was, in the end, their final gift to me. It cleared the wreckage and made room for me to finally thrive. Riley couldn't walk the stage. But I walked away, and I never looked back. If any part of my story echoes yours, know that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is necessary.